Well, this is something different from me. Number one, I'm in a different place. The home that I normally do these out of is under a extensive remodel. So I'm down the street in a rental and a little bit different look here. And we'll probably go back to the brick wall. That will be there. It's in a sunroom later on. Anyway, I'd like to go over a podcast today by Dr. Andy Reichert called Gold Crown Podcast. It's interesting. He's got a lot of good people on it. This is number 32, so I'm not the first one at all, but he asked me a couple weeks ago to get involved and to do a podcast. Well, let's split into two because we went way longer than either of us thought we would. So the information should be concise. It should be interesting. Everything's been updated. So I'm just going to go over the different points that we'll be covering today. Obviously, this is audio, so after you see me, in fact, you don't even have to look at me, which is probably better. After this portion, then we'll go for, 40 minutes or so into the podcast. What I'm going to be covering in the podcast. First of all, something that just came out in the last week or so, and this is March 11th that this is actually being filmed, 2021. Just in the last week, the best 401k plan for medical or dental offices ever, as far as I can see, has just come out. This is from White Coat Investor. Take a look at it. So I'm going to talk about that. Number two, my personal financial history. What was I able to do to retire at age 53? And by the way, I was not burned out. Next, my savings rate during the time period of when I was in my practice and asset mix, and then what it's been afterwards. It's different than it was back in the day. 1986 was a whole lot different than 2021. Next, the best investment dentist can get into today. There's one investment type that really outshines pretty much anything else these days. After that, why confidence in investing don't match. And I did a YouTube on that a while back, but we'll go over it again because it's so important. Why fees matter so much in your investments. And finally, the best investment book ever.
The views presented here do not constitute legal or financial advice and do not reflect the views of anybody other than myself. I am not a financial advisor, and you should always conduct your own due diligence and seek professional counsel prior to investing or making large life choices. Ultimately, you know your own situation best, and there's always risk involved in investing. Hello and welcome to the Gold Crown Podcast. Today, I am very excited to have on Dr. Doug Carlsen. I've been watching your videos, reading your articles, and as we mentioned in the little pre-chat before the start of the episode, you are the person that strikes closest to the heart of this entire podcast and what is important to not just me, but I imagine the listeners. And that's preserving time, planning out when you should retire, how you should retire. And you've studied a lot of this in depth, maybe more than anybody that I've ever heard of. And I know by comparison, I'm just an amateur in the space, but I thought it'd be great to bring you, an expert, on to discuss this and just join us to talk more about that. But yeah, thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's good to be here, Andy. Really appreciate you reaching out to me to help out here. And yes, I do have a lot of information. I've written a lot of articles. There were over 60, I think, for Dentaltown back in the day. I have not been heavily involved in the dental field for the last 4 years or so. So you're not going to see as many videos. Dentaltown articles stopped. I was actually writing for White Coat Investor, who I'm going to bring up here in a moment. So I basically am retired at this point. But still, I'm active in the field and keep up with things.
Well, I appreciate you at least being involved enough in the field that you'd be willing to do this. And clearly you still have an interest in it. So I'm very grateful, because a lot of this podcast is us interviewing dentists that either are young dentists that are aspiring to retire or dentists that have already retired, and how they did it and what their mindset was and how they were able to make it happen. And generally speaking, earlier than most people, not necessarily early retirement in the sense of like 20s or anything like that. But it's a low bar for us to say early retirement for dentistry when the average retirement age is closer to 70. If you retire in your 50s, then that's considered early, I guess, for most people. But well, I'm going to stop hogging the mic, and I'll let you go ahead and just discuss a little bit more about yourself and your background and what you did and do professionally, and just talk about your experience.
Sounds good. Well, the first question you wrote to me, Andy, is who are you? What did you do professionally? Summary of experience and background. Well, before that, though, I want to get something really important out here. This happened on Friday for you listeners out there. Friday, which would be, what are we today? 2 days ago. We are March 5th. White Coat Investor, which is my main source of financial information. This is a dentist. It's an MD out of Salt Lake City who has a blockbuster website for all things financial for actually any professional. He just announced that they are actually coming up with a 401k plan for medical and dental practices. I've been looking for something good for years. Dentaltown has a lot of blowback back and forth about 401k plans for the office. I've never found one that I felt totally comfortable with. Well, this one is a blockbuster. It looks fabulous to me. The fees look good. Jim Dolly, who's the editor and the owner of White Coat Investor, has been working on it for years, and they just came out with it. So if you want to go over to White Coat Investor at some time in the near future, if you're thinking of setting up a 401k for your office, I totally trust this. I'm really, really happy that happened. So I wanted to put that first. As far as me, grew up in Fresno, California. That's in the middle of California in the San Joaquin Valley. Dental school was UCLA, got out in 1977. I went to work with Indian Health for a year. Just a year. I didn't like where I was, so I went into private practice. But 78, 79, I was in Indian Health out in Acoma, Laguna, Pueblo, which is a really pretty place. After that, I started private practice in 1979. So that was quite a long time ago. Things were different back then as far as starting practices. In fact, I think if anything, it was maybe tougher. I sold my general dental practice in 2004, actually January 1st, 2004 at age 53. I did not intend on selling the practice at that age. Something happened. Something big happened in my life. My wife died in 2001 at age 47. That's way young. Yeah, she had cancer. So that changed everything. That's highly unusual. I was cruising in my practice in Albuquerque. It was a general practice. I specialized in gold castings of all things back in the day. Could sell them. People appreciated it. But it was basically a restorative practice that I had in Albuquerque. I had no intention to retire early at all. I mean, I was 47. I wasn't burned out. Life was good. Yet, at a college reunion in Los Angeles, I actually went to a college called Occidental College. I met another woman from my class that I had never known before. She's downstairs right now. Met another woman at my 30-year college reunion in 2002. She was exact opposite of my first wife. First wife was skinny. She was 5'11". She had a foul mouth. She was totally opinionated, and she was absolutely fabulous. And she was an artist. Vicki is a college professor. That was her profession. She was very verbally correct, looked totally different. And I thought she was really cool. So I thought, you know what? This may work. And it has. So Vicki lived in San Diego. She was actually teaching at a Cal State in San Diego area. I was in Albuquerque. We traveled back and forth for a year until finally deciding to get married, and we did on Christmas Day in 2003. Well, along the way, we had to decide who's moving where. Now, she said she probably could have gotten an administrative position at University of New Mexico without too much trouble, but she really wanted to get an administrative position at Cal State San Marcos, which is Escondido, which is North County, San Diego. She was in line to do that. It was basically set, and she really wanted to do that. Well, at that point, we finally looked at our financial picture. Again, I really had not thought of retiring. I was doing fine in my practice. How much did I have saved? Well, I realized that I had saved enough such that neither one of us would really have to work anymore if we didn't have to. That was at age 53. Yeah, we're both the same age. So we decided that I would move to San Diego while she could continue to work. But again, she really did not need to. So at that point, it's like, okay, so what do I do? And that's the end of this question. So next one, please, Andy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you already mentioned at what age you retired and what was your savings rate and what was your asset of choice when you were using that savings rate that you saved up?
Yeah. Okay. This is a really long answer. I go deep diving down into this, Andy, so you can interrupt me at any point if you
No,
want
please
to.
go for it. This is the stuff I love hearing. So my
Yeah.
silence doesn't mean I'm not interested. I'm actually on the edge of my seat. So please go
Well,
for it.
if you need clarification, interrupt me, because this is really the meat of this whole thing is what I invested in and how. So I actually sold the practice at January 2004 at age 53. Our savings rate with my first wife and I, we started savings actually kind of late in 1986. I was like 35 at the time. So savings rate from 1986 to 2003, that's 17, 18 years. We saved about 25 to 30% per year, which is pretty good. It's not, I've heard of guys saving more than that, but it was good. We invested 90% of it in individual muni bonds back then. Nothing in stocks or very little in stocks. Greg Stanley had a program back then buying individual muni bonds. It worked. And I have a note here that muni bonds returned about 6 to 8% per year over that time period. They're not doing as well now, and now I have a totally different portfolio. We had no tax deferred investments, 401ks in the office, and before tax deferment funds were not as popular back then. At the beginning of 2004, when I finally looked at what my nest egg was, it was about $2.5 million in today's dollars. And we figured we could live on 3% of that easily going forward for the rest of our lives. So all of a sudden it's like, hey, wait a minute, we've got options here, which was really, really cool. And I never really thought of it. Again, I was going on year after year, putting away money as much as I could, figuring this is a good thing to do.
Oh, that's amazing though. So what was your mindset shift like? Did it hit you like a ton of bricks? Because for most people, they kind of just have resigned themselves to working until they fall apart.
Yeah, it was the exact opposite of what you expect. Rather than finding out I don't have enough money, I'm going to continue to have to work. I don't want to work anymore. It's like, hey, I'm cruising. Dentistry's fine. Whoops, there's a whole lot of money here. So again, for the 5 years previous to that, of course, I was watching after my wife's health, and we weren't traveling as much, so we're probably able to save a little bit more money. After this, though, my wife did decide that she wanted to work. Obviously, she did become an administrator and eventually got a provost position, which she was saving buku bucks in Denver in 2009. We moved here to Denver. My wife did decide to work and just recently retired last August. So we've lived on about $9,000 to $10,000 per month while she was working, which is not a huge amount of money, but it's comfortable. Most dentists in retirement or pre-retirement like to live on a little bit more than that. Usually it's $12,000, $13,000 a month. This is after all taxes. This is spending money.
Right.
So we were living very frugally. Our net worth right now is right around $6 million, and we're age 70. That's way more than we need. We'll probably be spending $15,000 to $20,000 a year going forward. How's that going to increase so easily? It's called travel. So next part is the funds that I've used. And I talked about having bond funds before, or bonds, individual bonds before. Well, I switched that in about 2005 because bonds weren't doing quite as well as they were before. Stocks have been doing better long term. Okay, right now, since the mid 2000s, we've been invested almost totally in target retirement funds. Okay, these are totally dumbed down, the easiest things you can get. They rebalance automatically, and rebalancing means over a period of time, say you have a portfolio which is 50% stocks, 50% bonds, and you want to keep it that way. Hey, but stocks have done better the last couple of years. Now it's 60-40. Well, that's a change in the volatility of your portfolio. So you sell some of the stocks that you've made gains on, buy more bonds. That's called rebalancing. Target date funds do that automatically, so there's no fees involved. I've used these funds for both retirement and cash funds. Now, we do actually have retirement plan funds. I told you earlier we didn't make sense back in the 80s and the 90s, but we do have retirement funds now. So target date funds, these are the easiest, simplest, dumbest down things there are. They're cheap and they work. Any of the large brokerage firms, Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, you can get them and they're very inexpensive. I've got an article that I just found recently that I want to go over here for a second about target date funds. The article is called Target Date Funds and Portfolio Choice in 401k Plans, written by Olivia Mitchell of the Wharton School in Pennsylvania. It involved, and you don't need to know the details here, it involved investing from 2003 to 2015, 1.2 million people working for 880 companies. Big study. They found that retirement portfolios were dramatically altered when target date funds were adapted in 401k plans. Investors adopting one of these single funds had 2.3% annualized higher returns than non-target date holders. That's huge, guys. 2.3% per year higher.
Yeah, that's great. And even the military has the same thing. We have the TSP, and they have life cycle funds, the LF, and then fill in the year 2050, 2060, depending on when you anticipate you're going to be retiring. And just like you said, you don't have to be a huge stock follower and active investor. It's pretty dumbed down. You just put your money in there. It'll automatically rebalance. Higher risk while you're younger, lower risk when you're older. And for a lot of people, that just preserves a lot of their invested capital. So it makes a lot of sense.
Hey, you stole my thunder. Thanks for explaining it. You did better than I did. So appreciate
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted people to know that it was a thing in the military, because it used to be that you would just only get pension in the military and that's it. But now it's going to a mandatory match program in the military. So it's a little bit different now. Instead of getting 50% of your base pay, you now get 40% of your base pay. And where's that extra 10%? That 10%'s going towards your match on this TSP investing. You don't have to do a life cycle fund, but that's the default now, rather than the G fund with the government.
And it's a really good idea. And what we're finding out is, guess what? The dumbed down fund, life cycle is the same as target date, by the way, people. The dumbed down fund actually does better. And I've studied as far as all different ways to invest over the years. AAII, American Association of Individual Investors, has lots of different ways to invest. Shorting funds, all sorts of technical ways to invest. But guess what? Further, at the end of this study, it shows that pure target date investors in the low-cost, broadly diversified target date series could potentially realize up to 50% more retirement wealth relative to non-target date investors per life cycle. In other words, they do better per year long term. They accumulate a lot more money. And guess what? I've been almost totally in target date funds for the last 10 years before, the last 10 years. Why did I do that? Because it's simple. There's nothing to do with it. The returns are actually great. And again, you can get them at any of the large brokerages. And again, you military people out there, go for the life cycle fund, please. Almost any large firm has cheap life cycle or target date funds. I just looked up Vanguard. It's 0.1% per year. Schwab is 0.13%. That's virtually identical. One area not to get target date funds is with American funds, which a lot of stockbrokers use traditionally. Their fees average about 1.75% instead of 0.1 or 0.13. That's crazy. In other words, they're making a fortune. So most discount brokerages have really good deals. So basically, what do I do with investments? Nothing. I just let them sit there. Set it, forget it. Academically, all the academics point to that being the best way too. So as far as getting into all sorts of technical analysis, fundamental analysis, buying, selling, it doesn't make sense. Dan Canahan, who's a psychological investor. He's worked with all sorts of different things over the years with psychology in regards to investing, has told us that any change to our portfolio always involves a loss to our overall portfolio. Anytime you touch it, you break it. So be very careful about changes in your portfolio. In other words, don't churn your investments. Don't buy and sell individual stocks. I'm afraid Jim Cramer is absolutely crazy. He doesn't know what he's doing. Trading does not work. Rebalancing, of course, to get stocks and bonds or more into lines certainly makes sense, but even that, it should not be done, I don't think, more than once a year. Back in the day, some people were saying you should do it quarterly or semi-annually. I think annually is fine. Another thing that I'd like to bring up here, which is quite interesting, and I have a video on this, Andy. Charles Roblat and Daniel Crosby wrote something in the AAII journal, American Association of Individual Investors. By the way, this has a lot of great information, this journal. It has all sorts of things, and you can get into individual ways to invest. It costs like $45 a year to join. It's a really great institution. Anyway, steps you can take to reduce the risk of behavioral error. They wrote in January 2019. The main point of the study they go through is that most male investors who think they are outperforming the market are actually underperforming significantly. This includes advisors. This includes advisors.
Oh, that's bad.
Women do much better than men and have much less confidence. In other words, they were saying the more confidence you have, the worse you do. This is amazing. Key study and article, people with damage to the emotional processing centers of the brain have a hard time making basic decisions. Traumatic brain injuries is what we're talking about here. They have a hard time picking out which shirt to wear, what flavor of ice cream to pick, yet they make very good investors. They have zero confidence in the financial arena, yet do very well, better than the average male or female.
You know, that makes a lot of sense, because I feel like a lot of times we dentists, we're very eager to jump in and, just do it, get started. We're kind of quick pace and, don't waste too much time on the decision, just go for it, do it. And I think that's a perfect example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a cognitive bias where people with low ability or knowledge, in this case about stocks. I mean, the general person doesn't know that much about stocks. They're not students of it or anything, but they wildly overestimate their ability to actually do it well. So I think that's a great example.
Yeah. And most financial professionals that you work with will say, well, I'm beating the stock market every year, and they can't produce results that show that they have. So he says overall, emotion and confidence do not mix with investing decisions. It really doesn't. So again, I've dumbed it down to target date funds where I don't have to think about it. I have a lot of confidence in investing. Therefore, I've got to be extremely careful. Word about fees here. You should never pay more than 0.3% per year for an advisor. And again, the big firms, Schwab, Vanguard, Fidelity, and such, they will provide advice and give you a specific person to help give you advice. They charge around 0.3% per year. I think that's okay. This is beyond the actual fund fees, which really should not be in any case more than about 0.15%. So that comes up to about 0.5% per year that you should be giving to advisors and paying in fees. Anything more than that is way too high. So for $1 million account, 0.3% is pretty high. That's $30,000 a year to give to an advisor. Personal advisors can be found at this White Coat Investor site. He has a list of probably 30 dentist specific. I think there's a couple of them in there. The other thing that works really well are robo-advisors. Those are the ones that use computers to invest, and they have pretty dumbed down funds too. They can get more specific if you want to. The good ones you can find at NerdWallet website. Each year lists the ones that they like the best, and I trust that. Vicki and I rely on target date funds through Vanguard in particular. I've been with Vanguard for a long time. Traditionally they've had the lowest fees is why I got with Vanguard. The other ones pretty much match them now. So you don't have to go with Vanguard. We pay actually about 10% per year on all the funds we have, and there's no advisor fee because there's no need for an advisor. Mathematically, these funds will beat basically any plan found via any advisor out there. Questions here, Andy? Your thoughts?
No, that's fantastic. I'm just absorbing it all. But that's a really good summary of all that.
Yeah, and what does the target retirement funds or life cycle funds consist of? At Vanguard and the rest of it is pretty easy. There's a total stock market index, which is mainly U.S. large cap funds, total bond market index, which is usually U.S. Treasury bonds, and they use intermediate term in particular. There's international exposure to total international stock market index. Those are mainly developed country stocks, Europe, Japan, and total international bond market index. The international is usually about 30%, the EU, 25 to 30%, and the US portion is 75%. Some people don't want to invest in foreign markets, and I think that's okay. And even with the experts, that's an ongoing fight that they have whether to invest internationally or not. I'm fine with it. If you're not, you can individually get a total stock market fund and a total bond market fund, which are just U.S. based, and do it on your own at any of these discount brokerages.
Well, you perfectly anticipated my question there, because I was going to say, I've heard some people say that, well, what if the US government has a downturn, or what if the government itself just falls apart? If you're invested in like an international fund, then at least you've got some kind of diversity in your portfolio that's going to keep you afloat. But you seem to think that's not too much of an issue. I mean, that's kind of an unlikely situation, it seems.
I'm plus or minus on that. Yeah, I am with it, and I think your thoughts have good merit there. I totally believe it, but there's some people, in fact, even John Bogle and his buddies fight it all the time. Should we get involved in international funds or not? I think if you don't, you're going to be fine too. And you may make a little bit less, but if you're more comfortable with that, fine. There's one thing here at the end. I'm almost at the end of this section. A bit about investing. There are many good books out there with proper techniques. Best by far for me is The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by John Bogle. That was written probably 10 years or so ago. It takes about an hour to read, and it really gives you all the information you need. And at the end of each chapter, he says, if you don't believe me, here's someone else to read. Fabulous book. It's simple. It puts everything into perspective of all facets of investing. Overall, the research is very clear these days. The less an investor trades and the lower the fees, the better you do. There is no way to beat the system over any time period longer than 5 or 10 years. It just doesn't work. That's the end of this section, Andy.
No, that's great. Well, thank you for such a thorough response. That's, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. That's kind of what I should expect from somebody like you who's spent so much time looking into this and talking about this. So my next question is, despite dentists generally being considered as overachievers, why is it that we are so bad and underachieving when it comes to saving and investing for retirement?
The worst group is the MDs.
Oh, good. At least someone's worse than us.
They're even worse. They think they can beat the system because they're smart. And you can't. Smart really doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. I see most Americans as underachievers, and investing dentists included. But the smarter you are, the more intelligent you are, the more advanced degrees you have, probably that's really not going to help you with investing. We as a group, that's dentists, act like most Americans. We're chasing the great American dream. We want a nice house, nice cars, intelligent children, able to travel to nice places, and the ability to spend money on clothes and fine dining when we wish. Unfortunately, dentists start savings programs later than most Americans, and MDs are even later, often in our early 30s. I didn't really start investing until my mid-30s. So 15 years later, I was in pretty darn good shape. That makes a huge difference in the timing on the beginning of investing, and it's tougher now than it was back in the day, even if you use dollars to dollars, taking into account changes of inflation over the years. This may be 7 to 10 years later than our friends who do not go into professional school. The guys that come out ahead, who do probably the best with investing, are the engineers. They're not in school as long. They're great with spreadsheets. They track things, but they also know that individual stocks normally don't work very well.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's actually several podcasters I was just thinking of. Yeah, there's a podcast by a guy whose last name is, I guess his first name is Lane, and he's got the Simple Passive Cash Flow podcast. But there's a lot of engineers out there. We also had the Gold Collar Investor on, the host of the Gold Collar Investor podcast, Pancham Gupta. He's an engineer. And a lot of these high income engineers, you're right, they definitely seem on top of it. And representatively, I'd say I've run into a lot more of engineers that are active investors that seem to have an idea of what's going on than dentists. So is it just that we're not exposed to that thought as much, or is it just like you were saying with MDs that we've just gone through so much school that we figure, we're pretty smart. We'll
we're better than most people. We can do it on our own.
Yeah, but again, engineers, are they doing any better than the general public as far as investing? They can get involved in really seriously complicated things. Do they do better? No, they actually don't. The difference between engineers and doctors is that they have less money to spend. They've got a budget more than we do. Anyway, interesting thought. Gupta, I have looked at him before, so I know who you're talking about there.
Oh, great. Yeah, we had him as a guest a little while ago, but yeah, he was
Oh,
very kind.
I need to listen in on his
Yeah,
podcast
please
then.
do.
That was
Absolutely.